Anand Naidu is next.
Defying the Taliban, a record number of Afghan voters turn out to elect a new president. Could this lead to the first ever peaceful transfer of power in Afghanistan's history, or is there more violence ahead? Hello, I'm Anand Naidu, and you're watching The Heat. It's considered one of the most dangerous places on earth, and many had written off Afghanistan's presidential election even before it began. But despite the threat of violence to keep voters away from the polls, 7 million people cast ballots over the weekend. That's 64% more than the turnout in the 2009 election. 8 candidates are in the fray to succeed Hamid Karzai, and it may be weeks before Afghans know who their next leader is. Joining me now from Kabul is CCTV's Sean Callebs, who's been covering Afghanistan for years. Sean, good to see you. It's been quite a weekend in Afghanistan. What's the mood like in Kabul right now?
Yeah, really one of celebration. It was an amazing weekend. I think this country pulled off something that very few within the country and certainly very few outside of the country thought would happen. A very peaceful election. Think about the days leading up to it, the various Taliban attacks, the threats that had come out. This city was tense. It was a powder keg Thursday and Friday. But Saturday, the polls opened on time. Security was very, very tight on, and I have to tell you that. It was very difficult even going 200 meters without getting stopped by police or ANA officer. But right now, it is really... it's very hard to convey just how happy people here are. They believe that this is a real step forward, and what they really like is Afghans ran this election. Afghans were the observers. Afghans provided the security for this entire operation. So instead of looking to the outside to help, this is something they did from within, and that is being felt all across this country.
Right, Sean, as you say to us, you know, that is a very successful election. That's what most accounts are telling us as well. But there were some problems as well. There were stations that didn't open, and there were some stations that ran out of ballot papers, for instance.
Yeah, there were problems. There are at least 200 complaints that have been filed with the Independent Election Commission here, and that's probably on the low end. We know that 2 of the front runners, Dr. Abdullah and Zelmai Rusol, have come out and said that they believe that their campaigns were affected by fraud on the election day. You talked about running out of ballots, and that's significant because Afghanistan is really made up of a mix of ethnic backgrounds. And Abdullah is Tajik, and he expected to get a great deal of the Tajik vote. There were certain areas that have very Tajik strongholds, and those were a lot of the places that ran out of paper ballots. So Dr. Abdullah is concerned about that. There's also places in the east, in the south, where the Taliban still has more than a toehold. They really, in many ways, control power in those areas. 14%, that's a great deal. 14% of the precincts simply didn't open, either out of fear of concern or for a security reason. So there were some real problems, but it is a lot better than this country had ever done in the past, and certainly better than people had predicted. Also, you have to think about it. They actually rented 3,000 donkeys to carry ballot boxes to certain areas, far-flung provinces. So presumably those donkeys that carried the ballot boxes into those areas now have to carry them back out. So this isn't a high-tech campaign in many ways.
And counting has just started. We won't know the results for several weeks now, but who are the front runners so far?
The front runners are, they've really stood out from the start. Dr. Ashraf Ghani, he has a doctorate from Columbia University. He's an expert in the economic ways, and that is something that he really wants to focus on for this country. Dr. Abdullah, he was the country's first foreign minister under Hamid Karzai back in 2002. And Zelmai Rusol, also a former foreign minister who recently held the job until October of 2013. These are about the only 3 candidates with nationwide name recognition. And of those 3, Dr. Abdullah certainly has the strongest name recognition. We do know that the Independent Election Commission, working with the UN entities, is going to take a razor-thin slice of the vote. They're going to take a look at that and from a number of precincts, kind of look to see where that went, maybe 3 to 4 to 5% of the vote. Those numbers will begin to filter out as soon as this weekend. But it's too early to tell if that is going to have any impact. But what we really need to watch is one candidate to win the presidency must have 50% of the vote plus one vote. It's going to be very difficult for either any candidate to do that. Those three candidates have a good chance of splitting up the vote, but right now we have no indication of where the percentage stands, but certainly we expect those three to be at the top of that very long list.
Right, Sean, and take us to the mechanics of what happens next. I mean, the votes are now going to be counted. When will we know the initial result? And if there is a runoff, when will that happen?
Well, the results should be made as early as May 15th. It's going to be 5-6 weeks before people know. And that is kind of an agonizing time because a lot of things could happen. They still need to get all those paper ballots in, count them all. Then if there is a runoff, that is going to happen after that. But what we really need to watch out for is if any candidate alleges widespread fraud or abuse, corruption, the kind of thing that really challenges the election, throws it into chaos. We look back at 2009. We know that 12 million voters voted this year. That's a lot. 58% of the vote, nearly 6 out of 10 registered voters were able to go to the polls. Back in 2009, only 4.5 million turned out to vote, and that election was a fiasco. They basically had to throw out 20% of the vote because of fraud. In the end, there was a runoff between Karzai and Dr. Abdullah. Dr. Abdullah basically threw in the towel, said, this is just, at this point, nuts. It's so corrupt, it's going to be very difficult for the good of the country, let's move forward. So no one wants a repeat of that. And the reason that's important, if the outside area, if the U.S., other nations are going to continue to try to prop up Afghanistan, to give money, to provide aid, assistance, they're going to need to see that Afghanistan is taking positive steps in forming a democratic government. Up till now, it really hadn't done that. Hamid Karzai's tenure as president has really been characterized by fraud, corruption, abuse, and no one wants to continue to throw bad money after good.
Sean, you mentioned the possibility of fraud, and I'm just wondering whether, these allegations could lead at some point or become a source of conflict in the future, or do you think that the Afghans have reached a level of maturity that they will overcome this kind of discrepancies, allegations of fraud that are going to be made?
Well, I think that because the way this country is, people expect a certain degree of fraud. To think that magically all of a sudden this could be a fraud-free race is just unrealistic. So what they hope is it's controlled. It's in an area perhaps where they knew this kind of thing could crop up. It's something that can be contained. That's the significant part of this. If it does, then it could lead to chaos. And if that happens, you have this vacuum. And no one wants that because the Taliban didn't have an impact on Saturday's election, but the insurgents did not go away. They are still out there. So if this vacuum forms, if there's infighting, if there's anger among the various ethnic groups within this country, it's a chance for the Taliban to come in, seize the momentum, and have a big impact. Security has been really tight, and another thing this country has to be ready for, watch out for, they can't let the guard down. They did an amazing job, a great job. They were checking all kinds of cars every block in some areas to make sure bomb-laden cars wouldn't come in. People with vests wouldn't come in. Suicide vests would not come in. And they need to keep that momentum up to make sure they move forward with this election process and show that the Afghan authorities, government authorities, have control of this country.
And I guess, Sean, at the end of the day, the story of this election is the fact that there was just such a low level of violence where people had feared that there could be many more attacks against polling stations, against people trying to vote, against the country as a whole.
Yeah, I think it was really tense at the start of Saturday. There were all kinds of rumors, stories going around. There could be an attack here, there could be an attack here. We know this is building in the city. And that's, here in Kabul, where insurgents have made a lot of their main strikes. And think about leading up to it. There were 3 attacks within the past week, including a horrific attack in the eastern province of Host that killed 2 AP journalists, as well as a local hire who was, killed 1 AP journalist, injured another, and also injured a local fixer who was working with them. People were concerned that that kind of thing could happen, and that would keep people away from the polls. At the end of the day, there were scores of minor attacks, nothing that really set back the voting process, nothing that really disrupted it, and I think people in this country were, they say it was almost like Eid, a celebration on the day after that night. People were driving around their cars. They were thrilled that it went off. People were very proud to hold up the finger that had been dipped in that purple ink. And there's some amazing images coming out, too. Such access by the press. There's a very free press in this country. And there's one picture that just stands out to me so much. Back in 2009, the Taliban said if people voted, they would cut off their fingers. And there's one gentleman who was voting after he had his finger cut off, and he was using another finger to vote. So people at some point say they just have to stop being scared, and they are going to stand up to the insurgents. They did that in a big way here. Very few outside observers thought this could happen. Indeed, the international observers, most left this country after the horrific attack on the Serena Hotel 2 weeks ago. But it went off at this point as smoothly as anybody could have hoped for.
Thanks, Sean. Sean Callebs there in Kabul, Afghanistan. When we come back, we'll ask a former Afghan minister how significant this election is and if his nation can transition to a post-Hamid Karzai era peacefully.